Have you ever paused in the silence of the night and wondered how a single voice in the desert could echo across continents, across centuries, shaping the hearts of billions? It didn't begin with power nor prestige. It began with a divine message in a cave, entrusted to a man alone in prayer, a man with no army, no wealth, and no worldly might, only the truth. What began in the barren sands of Arabia poured like a river into every corner of the world. This wasn't by accident. It was purpose, divine will, and unstoppable conviction. In a world thirsting for meaning, Islam offered the water of clarity, unity, and surrender to the Creator. It offered a rhythm for the soul, a discipline for the heart, and a law for life. It pierced darkness not by force, but by the light of unshakable faith. Men and women saw something eternal in its call, something that transcended culture, color, and time. The cry of La ilaha illallah didn't just stay in the desert. It flew with merchants, travelers, scholars, and servants who lived what they believed. The power was not in conquest, but in conviction. That's how hearts change. That's how the world changed. Islam's global reach was rooted in spiritual conviction, not worldly ambition. That truth alone reshapes how we understand one of the most significant movements in human history. It was never about conquest for the sake of power, land, or dominance. At its heart, Islam called people to something deeper, something eternal. It was a divine invitation to submit wholly to the Creator, to surrender not just outwardly, but from the very soul. When the Prophet of Islam stood on the mountains of Mecca and delivered a message of monotheism, he wasn't seeking thrones or treasure. He was calling a broken, fractured world back to its origin, back to God. This message was so powerful, so pure, that even in the face of relentless persecution, torture, exile, and social rejection, the early believers held firm. They had no promise of worldly gain. In fact, most lost everything they owned. What they received in return was something the world could not see: peace in the heart, clarity in confusion, and a bond with the divine that nothing could sever. That spiritual fire burned so brightly that it ignited in the hearts of others simply by witness. When people saw Muslims pray with tears, give in charity without pride, speak truth when it cost them everything, they didn't see ambition. They saw authenticity. They saw people not chasing the world, but living for something beyond it. As the message of Islam traveled beyond the borders of Arabia, it did so not by imperial decree or forced conversion, but through people who embodied the message they preached. Merchants sailed to East Africa, India, and Southeast Asia, not to conquer, but to trade. And yet, wherever they went, their honesty, humility, and devotion left a mark. These were men and women who woke before dawn to pray while others slept, who gave up a portion of their wealth before keeping a single coin for themselves, who treated strangers with the dignity they gave to family. What explanation could there be other than that they believed what they followed? Their faith wasn't theoretical. It shaped their speech, their business, their homes, their justice. People who watched them couldn't ignore the contrast. It wasn't a religion of slogans. It was a way of life built on spiritual substance. That conviction was magnetic. It didn't need embellishment. The Quran itself challenged people to reflect, to observe, to listen with their hearts. And when they did, they found that this message spoke directly to the human soul. It didn't elevate race, nationality, or wealth. It elevated righteousness, patience, knowledge, and submission to God. It didn't ask people to become Arabs or erase their identity. It simply asked them to acknowledge the truth and live by it. That radical spiritual equality shattered centuries of tribal arrogance and class warfare. Whether king or slave, the call was the same. You are a servant of God first. That message gave dignity to the forgotten, direction to the lost, and restraint to the powerful. Even when Muslim rule expanded into new regions, history shows that conversion to Islam was not immediate nor forced. In places like Persia, Egypt, and the Levant, it took generations. Why? Because true faith cannot be imposed. It must be embraced. And those who did embrace it weren't chasing social status or material comfort. Many converted knowing they would lose their place in society, their family's approval, their comfort. But they also knew they were gaining something far greater, a direct connection to the divine, an unshakable purpose, a path that explained not just life, but death and what lies beyond. That's what fueled the global spread of Islam. It was spiritual conviction, strong enough to endure hardship, deep enough to inspire lifelong devotion, and sincere enough to win the hearts of those searching for truth. From the deserts of Arabia to the islands of Indonesia, from the cities of West Africa to the coasts of China, this message spread like a lamp in the night, quiet, steady, but unstoppable. It is not merely history. It is testimony. The people of Islam were not perfect, but the power behind their movement was not in their perfection. It was in the perfect message they carried and their unrelenting belief in it. When people say Islam became a global religion, they sometimes assume it was due to military power or political strategy, but the truth is simpler and far more profound. It became global because it was rooted in something no sword could deliver: sincere faith, spiritual certainty, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for the truth. That kind of power doesn't fade. That kind of legacy doesn't end. And that is why, centuries later, the call to prayer still echoes across continents. The words of the Quran are still memorized by millions, and the hearts of believers still bow, not to ambition, not to the world, but to the one who created it. The spread of Islam across the globe was not the result of empire alone or military might, but rather the fruit of something far more powerful: character, trade, knowledge, and unwavering belief. These four elements form the foundation upon which the message of Islam was carried from the deserts of Arabia to the shores of Africa, the mountains of Central Asia, the islands of Southeast Asia, and deep into the heart of Europe. It was not imposed upon hearts, but introduced through the integrity of those who lived it. The character of early Muslims spoke louder than their words. They were known for their honesty, humility, and justice. They did not preach a message they failed to live by. Their actions bore the weight of their convictions. The Prophet himself was known as Al-Amin, the trustworthy, long before his prophethood, and his followers carried that legacy forward. When Muslims engaged with new communities, they did not approach as conquerors, but as guests, neighbors, and fellow human beings. Their character opened doors that force could never have touched. In markets, they dealt fairly, avoided deceit, and kept their promises. In social dealings, they respected the rights of others, showed compassion to the weak, and treated enemies with dignity. People were drawn to Islam not simply because of what it taught, but because of how Muslims lived. Trade played a crucial role in spreading this lived example far and wide. Muslim merchants traveled across vast distances, not for conquest, but for commerce, and in doing so, they carried with them the values and ethics of their faith. In places like Indonesia, Malaysia, East Africa, and even parts of China, Islam spread not through political dominance, but through the trust and respect these traders earned. They didn't preach aggressively. They simply lived in a way that made people ask, what guides your life? What makes you different? The answer was always the same: faith in one God and obedience to his teachings. The spiritual depth behind their discipline left a lasting impression. Over time, entire communities embraced Islam, not because they were forced, but because they witnessed a better way of living. Beyond character and trade, knowledge was another pillar of Islam's expansion. From the earliest days, Islam emphasized the pursuit of learning. The very first revelation, read in the name of your Lord, set the tone for a civilization built on education. Wherever Muslims settled, they established centers of learning, libraries, and schools. Baghdad, Cordoba, Timbuktu, and Cairo became beacons of knowledge where people from all faiths came to study. Muslims preserved ancient texts, translated works of science and philosophy, and advanced knowledge in fields like medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and geography. But it wasn't just secular learning that spread. Islamic scholars also carried with them deep understandings of theology, ethics, law, and spiritual refinement. Through their debates, writings, and public lectures, people encountered a religion that was both intellectually satisfying and spiritually uplifting. Islam welcomed questions, invited reflection, and offered profound answers about the nature of life, death, and the hereafter. That intellectual legacy did not belong to the elite alone. It was passed down generation by generation through accessible teaching, communal worship, and shared religious practices. The Friday sermon, the public recitation of the Quran, the discussions in mosques and homes, all of it helped embed Islamic values deeply into the cultures it encountered. Over time, Islam became more than a belief system. It became a way of life. It adapted without compromising its core. It was firm in its truth, but flexible in expression. Whether in African villages, Central Asian steppes, or Indian coastal cities, Islam merged with local customs in a way that allowed it to thrive while still maintaining its distinct identity. None of this would have been possible without unwavering belief. The people who carried Islam across continents did so because they believed with every fiber of their being that they were stewards of truth. They endured hardship, loneliness, persecution, and exile because they knew what they carried was not man-made, it was divine. Their belief gave them courage, their faith gave them direction, and their love for God gave them endurance. When faced with rejection, they responded with patience. When offered riches to abandon their mission, they refused. When threatened with violence, they stood firm. This spiritual resilience inspired those around them. People are moved by conviction, by those who live with purpose and die with peace. That's what made Islam so powerful in its spread. It was not just an idea, it was a reality lived out daily with sincerity and sacrifice. The spread of Islam wasn't accidental or mechanical. It wasn't the product of force or manipulation. It was the natural result of a people deeply devoted to their Creator who allowed that devotion to shape every aspect of their lives. Their trade routes became highways of truth. Their homes became centers of hospitality. Their minds became tools for inquiry and innovation. Their lives became mirrors reflecting the light of revelation. And in every corner of the world they reached, hearts open, not because they were forced, but because they were invited by character. They're inspired by knowledge, served through trade, and ultimately moved by the unwavering belief of those who walk the path of God with humility and grace. The truth of Islam resonated deeply with every soul that was sincerely searching for purpose, order, and peace. From the moment its message was first recited in the stillness of a cave, it struck a chord that would echo in the hearts of countless people across the ages. It wasn't dressed in elaborate philosophy or cloaked in mystery. It was clear, powerful, and deeply human. Islam addressed the core questions that burn within every soul. Who am I? Why am I here? What happens after death? It did not evade these questions or complicate them. It answered them with simplicity and certainty. Answers that brought comfort to the restless, direction to the lost, and light to those in darkness. The essence of Islam is rooted in recognizing that there is only one God, completely sovereign, utterly just, infinitely merciful, and that every human being is created to know Him, worship Him, and live in harmony with His will. That message was not new, but Islam restored it in its purest form, free from distortion, mythology, or man-made hierarchies. It gave people dignity. It reminded them that they were not accidents of nature or slaves to kings, but honored creations of the Almighty with a divine purpose. That truth resonated deeply because it met the needs of both the mind and the soul. It spoke to the intellect with reason and clarity, but it also embraced the heart with compassion and hope. In a world marked by social injustice, tribalism, and spiritual confusion, Islam offered divine order. Its teachings outlined a framework for a just and balanced life, one that honored family, protected the weak, elevated the poor, and guided the powerful. Its laws were not arbitrary rules meant to burden, but signs of divine wisdom meant to purify and elevate. Prayer, charity, fasting, honesty, humility, forgiveness. These were not abstract ideals. They were living principles that brought structure to life and connected the human being to something greater than himself. People didn't find in Islam a religion that asked them to escape reality. They found a path that taught them how to live in it with purpose, with boundaries, and with peace. For those overwhelmed by chaos, the Quran provided a rhythm. Its verses weren't just recited, they were absorbed. They addressed sorrow, fear, doubt, temptation, pride, and despair, not with cold doctrine, but with divine counsel. Those who listened to the Quran with sincerity felt as though it was speaking directly to their hearts, healing their wounds, affirming their worth, and calling them towards something far beyond this fleeting world. It did not promise luxury or ease, but it offered something more valuable, peace of the soul. That inner peace became visible in the lives of those who embraced Islam. Even in poverty, they gave thanks. Even in pain, they remained patient. Even in loss, they held on to hope. That kind of strength could only come from truth, and it drew others in like a magnet. Islam's truth did not belong to one race, one class, or one region. It welcomed all who were willing to surrender to God, whether they were kings or slaves, scholars or shepherds. That universal appeal spoke to the soul's deepest yearning to be known by the Creator and to walk in step with His will. And in Islam, people found not just knowledge of God, but a direct relationship with Him. No need for intermediaries, no need for rituals they didn't understand. They could speak to God in their own language, in their own pain, in their own joy. That intimacy changed lives. It gave the poor a sense of nobility, the broken a sense of healing, and the sinner a path to redemption. This resonance wasn't confined to individual spirituality. It shaped entire communities. When Islam entered a society, it did not create chaos, it brought order. It established rights for women and orphans. It curtailed exploitation, or it encouraged education. It abolished false gods and replaced them with accountability to the one true God. In regions torn by division, it created unity. In hearts filled with confusion, it planted clarity. Wherever Islam spread, people didn't merely adopt a new religion. They entered a new way of life, one that aligned their inner desires with a higher purpose. Even today, in a world drowning in distractions and despair, the message of Islam continues to resonate with those who are truly searching. It still calls the brokenhearted, the disillusioned, the spiritually hungry. It still answers the cry of the soul that whispers, there must be more than this. And Islam responds, yes, there is more. There is a Lord who sees you, hears you, knows you, and invites you to return to Him. This is why Islam spread and why it continues to spread, not through pressure or persuasion, but through the power of its truth. A truth that does not fade, a truth that does not fracture, a truth that meets every human soul right where it is and lifts it toward where it was always meant to be, in peace, in purpose, in the presence of its Creator. The story of Islam's rise as a global faith is not merely a tale of history. It is a testimony of hearts touched, lives transformed, and nations uplifted by the power of divine truth. From the quiet deserts of Arabia to the bustling cities of the world today, the message has remained unchanged. There is no God but Allah, and to Him belongs all worship. This message continues to resonate because it speaks directly to the soul's deepest needs, for meaning, for direction, and for peace. In every generation, people have discovered that Islam is not just a religion, it is a complete way of life, offering balance between the spiritual and the practical, between the heart and the mind. What truly fueled its global reach was not force or politics, but the unwavering conviction of those who believed in its truth and lived it with sincerity. Their character, their sacrifice, and their faith became the proof of what they preached. Islam became a light not because it demanded submission through fear, but because it offered a path of hope, mercy, and eternal purpose. And to this day, that light continues to call out to those seeking truth, not just to follow it, but to live it and to be transformed by it.